Good. Excellent. So, hi everybody. This is a session about how to run an open source project like you wear some type of fedora. So welcome to the session. I'm Magnus Glantz and I'm a Principal Specialist Adoption Architect at Red Hat. I've been in the open source ecosystem since about '95 and worked with open source since about start of 2000. Something personal about me is that once this worn hat of mine saved my life in San Francisco. A practicality is that we're going to do questions at the end of the session. So, Red Hat, if you didn't know, we have been quite successful at offering support for open source solutions since about '93. And I would say that we probably helped create basically some new business models around open source. We have a so-called upstream first development model, which means that we sell commercial products and all the code is open source. We will never basically fork. All the features that goes into the products goes into open source projects. Good to know. So we actively engage in a lot of open source projects, and this is context, I guess, a little bit. Most of the key Linux, Kubernetes, AI automation projects, I would say. We also engage in over 30 different standard bodies because, open source and open standards, they feed into each other. Next is that we also do a lot for, I would say, the open source in general. We run around in a lot of the policy corridors of the world. And sometimes, sadly, we are alone trying to champion open source, trying to prevent discrimination against the open source ecosystem and such. But many times we do get help and we engage with other organizations, and this was just from the top of my mind some of the organizations that many of them I worked with myself. For example, the Cyber Resilience Act in the beginning, when it was just a very poorly known draft standard, it made open source illegal. So we managed to fix that together with our many friends. So in this session, which is going to be executed at breakneck speed, there's 3 parts to it. I think Daniel also had 3 parts. It's good. So normally I would spend several days discussing these things with an organization, a team. But today we're going to do it in less than an hour. So brace yourself. This is going to go really fast. So with that said, to mentally and physically prepare yourself for this presentation, let's try to stand up just once, please. Okay, and then let's take a deep breath. Okay, you can sit. Here we go. Part 1, preparing to launch the open source project. So let me start by saying, if you're in this session because you are considering to launch an open source project, you're in the trenches of this, or you're looking to improve an existing open source project, thank you for being awesome. So without a doubt, it's really exciting process to start an open source project. You engage with all these people, I mean, in your organization, if you're in some type of organization, but mainly outside of it as well. And it is a really exciting, fantastic development model. So, but perhaps you ask yourself, how do you kind of get started with that? how do I begin, how can I kind of set my open source project up for success? And without a doubt, it's a complex process. It has a lot of moving parts and a lot of different considerations, basically, that you optimally should do before you begin. So these many considerations is what this session is about. So, for the first part, I'm going to outline some of the basic considerations that a person or a team or an org can do when preparing to launch an open source project. So I'm going to discuss some of the most effective questions, basically, that you can ask yourself and other people to kind of frame these considerations in a good way. So hopefully these questions are going to kick off some thoughts in your head. So I'm going to start by reviewing the 6 general categories of basic considerations, things that you should do before launching an open source project, and they are listed here. And this can be quite a lot for a single person, I think. You know, and in a lot of these categories you have the need for some specialized skill as well. So if you can, if you're an organization, I would say, you know, maybe create some different teams potentially that focuses on the different items, if that's available to you. So the first consideration then, we're going to have some look at project goals and positioning. So these are considerations that are commonly really important for the success of a new project. So the first thing that a project needs is a strategy, and I'm going to detail much more into this, but let's look at it from kind of 10,000 feet. This is also described in a briefing document of ours. It's called Developing an Open Source Strategy, and it's linked in the presentation, so you can look at it afterwards. But here are some basic steps then for setting an open source project strategy. So first is outlining technical problems then that the project actually solves. So describe the project's purpose. Will this project, you know, help people to do something new? How is it going to improve people's lives or work, maybe? Next, defining the project's target users and value proposition. So basically, identify the type of users that you think is going to benefit from your project. So how, ask yourself basically also why they should contribute to your project. So simply opening up your code, that's typically not enough to get a successful open source project going. So how are you going to make your case to contributors of your project? How will you connect with them and kind of convince them to join your efforts to improve the world? So next, we have survey of the landscape and articulating key differentiators. So basically, it is very likely that your project is going to join this ecosystem of different similar open source projects even. So why should people join your project instead of some other project? And you will also depend on other open source projects. So document these relationships basically and ask yourself, why should you launch an open source project when you can join one? Finally, or continuously, we have establishing an initial roadmap. So successful open source projects, they tend to start off with some sense of direction, basically. So give some considerations to this. What kind of features are you going to prioritize at launch? How often will you create new releases? Do you have some community milestones, perhaps? And we'll dive into this in a bit. So next we have the project identity and brand. So let's examine it for a little bit. So this is a natural extension of the previous set of items, because this is really about articulating your project's appearance and positioning in relation to others. And some of these things you might think, oh, this is a lot of stuff, and it feels like it's a bit early for me to think about these things, but trust me when I say you're gonna benefit. So first thing is compiling a list of name candidates. So this is obviously one of the first things that you think about when you create a project. What is it to be called? So if you want some structure to that process, you can maybe start by brainstorming some qualities that your name should have. And then develop a little list of candidates, and then maybe you'll go and talk to some people, what they think about your top choices. Next is designing a logotype, and you probably notice it. A lot of laptops have a lot of stickers on them. A lot of very popular open source projects, they have very known logotypes. So I would say do yourself a favor and get a visual identity. Basically follow a similar process to selecting a name, sketch some ideas, get some input, select a favorite. Then we have examination of prior art. So especially in the world of, AI agents that just spits out logos, do some homework so that you, best case, don't maybe confuse people that your project is too similar to another, or worst case, that you happen to infringe on some trademark. Then we have reserving assets. So of course, or not of course, but perhaps you'd like a domain for your project website. So register that, determine what tools and platforms and services you might need, and reserve some appropriate accounts on those services. Next up, licensing and legal. I'm not a lawyer, this is not legal advice. Having a legal expert can sometimes be a good thing, and yet it's rarely a thing that we always have access to. I know that there are some lawyers. Jimmy, are you in the room? Yeah, from Ericsson, you know him? Go and bother him about your legal questions. I mean, take advantage. So, next, so the first step would be determining, anyways, the criteria for your license. So the license really defines how people can use your software, how they can engage with you, your project. So probably ask some people that you trust about how they would like to use your project potentially, and consider what they could potentially do with that software, and also ask yourself under what conditions that you would accept contributions. Next is choosing an actual open source license. So go to Free Software Foundation or go to Open Source Initiatives, and they have neat lists of open source compatible licenses, and then go about to select an open source license that satisfies all the stakeholders. Make sure that they are on the list of either FSF or Open Source Initiative, right? Okay, then make sure that all your project material really clearly communicates the licensing conditions. Also document your decision in general. Why did you choose this license? Because in 10 years you might not remember. Okay, then we have registration of trademarks, and this is a little bit of a country-specific thing, so yeah, talk to a lawyer. So then we have governance. So in open source project, governance is really about the processes that distributes power and responsibility. So who can do what, and how can they do that? And projects, they often begin with really fluid governance models. It's not really set, things just happen, you fall down a hill kind of process. But as you scale your project, formalizing governance is really powerful. It'll help you to scale. So here's a quite a few considerations regarding project and community governance done. So first off is outlining community roles and responsibility. So record basically the different functions that contributors could have in your project. And you know, people can contribute in many different ways, right? It's not just writing code. So consider that. What kind of roles will you have in the project? And also what kind of rights and responsibilities do you have in the different specific roles? And then how do you become eligible for such a role in the project? Next, we have defining governance model and process. So basically, sketch out some preliminary governance process. So for example, it's a good thing to have, for example, a project leader. So how often will that leadership perhaps change? Is it some rotating scheme, or how does it work? Who can influence project decisions, really? This is a key question. Who can commit code to it? How does a person acquire and retain the privilege of being able to merge code even in the project? And how can community members then also amend governance process? Okay, then we have setting provisions for sub-project and lifecycle management, and this is easy to miss. And at least I've heard some speakers before, but I got a feeling that they hadn't considered this. So basically, if your project is likely to feature a lot of subcomponents or smaller projects that joins your project, you need to give some thought regarding how you oversee the maturity of the lifecycle management kind of ecosystem here. I'll give you an example. So at Red Hat we have this fairly popular automation project. It's called Ansible. And it's an automation framework. And then there is, way over 100,000 open source projects that are basically tools in the framework that does actual automation stuff. So you can understand, so there's a relationship here. There's a module that does some automation, there's a framework that, the relationship between these. How do you manage that? Give that some thought. Then you have a privacy policy. GDPR is a real thing. Document any need for use of personal data. Describe how it's been handled to help contributors also understand this. Then we have establishment of a code of conduct. So you should have some norms and expectations for people who participate in your project. And also be sure to outline what's the consequences when someone makes infractions to your norms. If someone is really mean to someone, maybe, etc. What happens? They're bullying or something. Okay. Then we have exploration of foundational memberships. So there's a lot of foundations, right? Linux Foundation, Clips Foundation, Apache Foundation, Cloud Native, and so on. And you might have some plans for this. You might want to donate your project to one of these foundations, but they have rules for acceptance. And so then you need to read up on what those rules are. Okay, next is infrastructure and financing. How are you doing? So you should explore these things. Basically, it's to make sure that your project has the proper bones to stand when it's ready to stand. So first is funding provisions. Okay, so basically you'll have costs in your project potentially. So how do you have a need for funding? How do you acquire funding? I think Daniel said this. He was bad at this. So listen, Daniel. So you should have, this should be a plan for this. How do you acquire funding? How do you manage funding? Who has access to a bank account? and under what conditions and so on. So a lot of boring stuff, but it's good. Then we have administrators for web domains and social media accounts, who is going to be primary contact with a registrar who's going to control social media accounts. Can be several people. There are projects that has suffered serious issues where people who was the contact just disappeared, for example. Then we have identified trademark holders. If you have trademarks, some person or organization will need to hold these. Okay. Then we have essential tooling, and so basically consider the common components of open source project infrastructure. So who's going to provide those? Who's going to have access to those, and under what conditions? So, as a little bit of a tangent into this, here's some list of common components of essential open source project infrastructure. So, and this is, a lot of stuff, and you can see on the line of development tooling. I've written here AI included, and this is, a fluid discussion to kind of go back to what Daniel said. A lot of the stuff there, the drowning, the drowning is real, and we are experimenting with new ways to basically be able to deal with this as maintainers for many projects, and we do think that we see at least an indication that AI might be a part solution to dealing with the influx of a lot of stuff to the projects. With that said, it's going to be a temporary solution. The real solution to the problem is that more people are engaged in open source projects. That is where we need to go. But yeah, there's a lot of things, and if you consider these things, set them up before even launch, that will help you. There are some of these things that makes more sense to maybe have consensus in your community to select maybe a shared tool or something like that. But yeah. Okay, last category for this is metrics and sustainability, and we're gonna also dive deeper into this. But some of the best planning that you can actually do for your project is what happens after you've launched, that kind of longer term planning. So let's look at that. For example, establishing an inclusion plan. So, not sure if you've noticed, but the most successful open source projects, they welcome really diverse set of contributors. So how are you going to attract people with really different background and skill, and so on? Think about that. Then we have outlining community health and metrics. So basically, you need to know when is or need to, but it's very useful if you can tell when your project is successful. So what science indicates that your kind of strategy that you set up has been successful? Right. So some quick resources. Get the presentation and use the links. That would be my advice, basically. But we have downloadable and printable versions of, for example, the material that I'm going through here, or a lot of it, available on redhat.com. Let's kind of go through it, just quickly reiterate. So we have the project goals and positioning. What kind of context is your project joining? Understand that, understand your target audience. Have some identity, a visual one maybe. Consider what kind of license you are going to choose, because it drives how people can interact with you. And then have some governance, some basic one at least. And then consider the infrastructure and financing, so you're not surprised suddenly when, oh, we need CI or something. And then consider also how to kind of measure things. Okay. First part, we made it. Bravo, bravo, well done, well done. Okay, I could barely see a single head doing like this. Okay, so this is part 2, developing the strategy. Okay, so I'd like to start by a quotation, and it's from Carl Vogel's really influential book, and it's called Producing Open Source Software. I recommend that. And he writes, and I'll read off the screen here, so the hardest part about launching a free software project is transforming a private vision to a public one. You and your organization might perfectly well know what you want, but expressing that goal comprehensively to the world is a fair amount of work. It's essential, however, that you take the time to do it. That is because successful open source projects, like I said, it's more than just opening up the code and being open to collaborate with people. Most effective and most popular projects in the world, they have really clear goals that they have set. They thoroughly understand their communities, the people who use the software, and yeah, what they want. So here's the overview of part 2. So we're gonna review some key questions then basically that you can ask yourself to create a strategy for your project. And by answering these questions, basically you get the parameters to establish a basic open source project strategy. Okay, so let's look at those questions right now. So what's the project? Who are the users? How do you engage with these users? What alternatives to your project exists? Are you associated with any adjacent projects? What's the goals? Who's your main peeps? Okay, so let's explore these questions. Unpack some issues that's related to each and every one. So first question is, what's the project? You can only develop a strategy for a project when you have clearly articulated what the project's utility and purpose is, simply. So this is the fundamental question. How does the project really help its users? What kind of problem does it solve? So before delving deeper, you must be able to describe your project to a potential user. So, and quite often open source projects, they use really tricky terminology to describe themselves that just is unfamiliar to people who are not really diving deep into the project already. So let's have an example. So we'll do an experiment. I'm going to use a project out of Red Hat's ecosystem of projects, and it's I think a less known project. It's called Istio. Do you know Istio? Raise a hand. Oh, shit. Okay, you cannot play. Okay, so you cannot. Sorry, but good for you. And I'm going to step through some different descriptions of Istio, and then we'll see how those descriptions works for you. And raise a hand if you understand what Istio does properly. Istio is a service mesh. Okay. A second. Istio is a framework, and it allows you to manage each application's data plane from a central control center. Raise a hand if that's enough. That's one only. Istio is a central switchboard that allows you to control the observability of network traffic between microservices across an enterprise. A few more. And then we have Istio is like a traffic system for your application. There's a proxy used by Istio, and it sits in front of every application node, and it directs the traffic in and out of the application or the node, and traffic rules are then set in a central control center for the application. You understand? Okay, so there are different people raising their hands, but I'm noting that there are some people who never raised their hand. And that's a good point here. Think about how you describe it, because if you end up at a GitHub page and you don't understand what a thing is, how likely are you to join that project, to contribute? Right? This is an important thing. Next question to ask is, who's the users of the project? So to develop a project strategy, you need to understand who you cater to. So a lot of projects, I would say, don't understand necessarily who use their software and what those users do with that software. So as you paint a picture of who your user base is, you can use a trick that I'll describe now. So ask this question, what must be done? And then, how do your software then help someone to do that task? And then you ask yourself, who's likely to most likely need to do that task? And then, who would use the software to do that? And your answers initially is going to be pretty basic. Maybe you'll just say IT professional or some mobile application developer, etc., etc. It's a good start. You're already thinking about who might be using your software. So next is refining then the kind of target persona by honing in on more specifics. So helpful questions can, for example, be, is your project useful to, is a private person, an individual, or is it a big organization? It's a bank, something. Or is it like a specific type of organizations? Is it like a vertical of business or industry that will find your project useful? Or what kind of size of organization? Because sometimes you require a specific size of organization to hit a certain problem, for example. And then who's going to download the software, who's going to install it, and who will use it? And are the people different that are kind of installing it and using it? And are there administrators and normal users? Go through all of that. So then we have basically articulated a little bit around what the project is and who would be using it, and that's a really good start. Next is considering how to engage with the users, and I think this is maybe one of the really important things to take away. So when people start using your product, obviously you would like them to also become a member of your community, right? Contribute. And this is a little bit of the, most biggest problem that we have in the open source ecosystem. People don't contribute enough, simply. So how can you set your project up to make it as easy as possible for people to become active contributors? That is the question that we will now look at. Okay, so determining basically how you focus the community building efforts can be, tricky. And my suggestion is that you try and think about your engagement activities in your community, and then sort them into three different categories. So low touch, so that would be one-to-many type, sheep things. And I mean sheep from the perspective of time that your community has to spend on it. And then we have medium touch, and that's more networking type activities. I'll give you some examples later on, so it'll make sense to you. But it's still one-to-many, but it's still more where you have to engage a little bit more, spend more time on those activities, and then you have high touch, which is kind of activities useful to build relationships, actual, human relationships, and get people to maybe become a core contributor, for example. So here's some examples. So low touch, website, simple, right? It's one-to-many. You record a podcast, maybe, one-to-many. There's a little effort, but then you can potentially reach a lot of people. Really useful to get out and get your project known to a lot of people. This will typically initiate the first touch between you and your users. Then we have medium touch. So, for example, bug tracker, issue trackers, community forums, etc. So that's what I mean with networking effect. It allows your community to kind of help itself a little bit here. But of course, if you have an issue tracker, people expect you to look at the issues and so on. So it takes a little bit more effort out of your community. And then you have high touch, which is personalized guided training, maybe to bring a contributor to become a core maintainer, perhaps, or standing on a stage and talking about stuff, for example. Okay, Sam, what alternatives to your project already exist? So your strategy needs to kind of account for context around you. So the next is going to be regarding the field of alternative projects in which that's around you. So here's some examples of, here. So there are two initial questions basically that you can ask yourself. One is, does your project have some direct competition? Hey, Håkan there from SUSE, I see him. But if that's not the case, why is that? Why don't you have any competition? Is it that you're breaking ground in some new area now? Or is it perhaps that people are simply using other types of projects to solve the same type of problem, perhaps? That could be it. Secondly is, how do other open source projects then solve the problem that you are looking at in a different way? So if the kind of competitive field has a strong incumbent, then the question is, what can you learn by analyzing that incumbent, that other project that currently everyone uses? What can you learn from looking at their community, target users perhaps, and then ask yourself how you are going to differentiate yourself, your work from theirs, and motivate people to join, your project, simply. And if there is no strong incumbent and it's just a bunch of projects pretty similarly positioned, then why not join one of these projects? And if the question is no, why not? Why not? So answering these questions are going to help you to pin down and prioritize users, features, and determine the best ways to engage with the community, basically. Next, so as an example then, so let's say that you survey the kind of competitive field and you discover that, you're this kind of upstart disruptor. There was a way to do things and you just found a completely new way to do that. So there's this incumbent, this kind of traditional way to do things, which you are disrupting now. So then you might want to anchor messaging, for example, on this incumbent. For example, say that, you can do it like that, but if you do it like we want you to, then it's more memory efficient, or it's much faster, or it's much more secure. Yeah, you see where I'm getting. Now, instead, if you turn out to be some pioneer in a field, then, and your goal, if your goal, by the way, is to kind of get market dominance somehow, then you would want to spread your message as quickly as possible. Basically, it means that you maybe need some larger budget for marketing, for example, to kind of spread focus on defining the problems, basically, that you have a solution to. Then we have, are you associated with adjacent projects? And now we're going to move from competition to cooperation. So ask yourself, are you associated with any other projects? I mean, the projects that are around you in the kind of ecosystem in which you are operating. And if your project is frequently used, for example, together with another open source project, then your association to that project might present a good opportunity to, grow awareness of your project, for example. And so accounting for these kind of complementary adjacent projects, that can really inform your strategy for your project. Sorry. So here's an example again from Red Hat's ecosystem of products and projects. So, for example, Ceph. Ceph is a storage technology, and you can use it basically to provide storage to OpenStack and Kubernetes. So OpenStack and Kubernetes, they would then be adjacent projects for Ceph, right? And yeah, catering for these adjacent projects then is a good way to find an audience. Maybe an audience that can help influence your roadmap even. You see that if they're users of your stuff potentially, then they'll inform your decisions and also inform your kind of outreach efforts. Next is, what are the goals for the project? And this is an existential question, I would say, for open source projects, but many have a difficulty answering it. And so if you are a vendor, if you're an organization that's creating open source, ask yourself why, basically. Because the answer to those questions are going to basically inform your investments and marketing strategies. If you want to just grow a market share, or if it's that you want to promote an open standard, or even in some cases people create open source just to disrupt someone, or if it's to increase demand for something else in a portfolio, for example. So in absence of a strong vision, you might find yourself underinvesting in time and money, simply because it's difficult to understand your project within your organization. And with that, alluding a little bit in the previous item down to that, who are your key stakeholders, basically? So in every project there is typically, if it's created by an organization, there's some small team, a small group of people that really cares deeply about the project. And if you're lucky, they can represent a diverse set of interests that are important to project development, and those people are the stakeholders. So this is, doesn't look like this in every organization, but if you're like us, develop software, you typically have engineering leads, you have product management representatives, product marketing people, product security support org people, and those can be then a reference group, and then you basically convene, let's say maybe 1 or 2 times a year, and then you talk to those people. Can be a good thing. So those are the 7 questions then that allows you to create a open source strategy. And I'm running out of time and will go into the last final part. And here we will have a test where I'll ask you about the things that we went through here. And if you don't remember it, you'll be asked to leave. No. But so why the initial question is, why do you care about project health, basically? And so the answer to that question is that imagine when you find a new open source project and you want to use that to solve something, then you care about stuff, right? You care, is this project going to disappear tomorrow or not? Is it sustainable? And that's basically project health. We're helping you, people to answer that question. So here, let's have a little bit of a test. So take 10 seconds to read through. These are health metrics. Do you see project A and project B? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Project A, do you think that's healthy? Raise your hand. Some hands, yeah. Project B, is that healthy? Raise your hand. Trick question. It's just 2 partial snapshots of one project. Okay. And this is a little bit how it can go with metrics. You're like blind people grasping different parts of an elephant, and you're like, identifying different animals. And basically we need something more efficient. We need something comprehensive, and we need something which is robust to measure health of an open source project. So we need standardized set, basically, of qualities and associated metrics then. And also have some attention to project culture and dynamics, because you probably saw in the last slide there was a lot of output there. Number of commits, number of this, number of this. When it's regarding, for example, if you have a good mix of people in your project, that's not necessarily always measured about outputs, or you have like a good dynamic in your community. They're at least measured in different ways. Then we have considerations for the overall life cycle and ecosystem. So no open source project, well, that I know of at least, exists in a vacuum. No project exists out of the kind of context of the local ecosystem. So, and different projects, they mature at different speeds, and this overall maturity affects the assessment. So basically looking at the ecosystem around the project teaches you a lot about the potential longevity of that project. We'll take a Red Hat example again, Ansible. Okay, so there's somewhere between, over 100,000 related open source projects. It tells you a little bit about the, health of the actual central project, right? Same with Linux, right? Okay, so examine the context, not just the project in a vacuum. Next, then, for defining project health. So we ask ourselves, what's a healthy project? And you could say, for example, it's a project that demonstrates some good open practices, it uses open infrastructure, it has an open culture, and it has a goal to become a more sustainable project. When we dive into the details of this, and we're now very close to the end, we basically just think about what we learned in this session. It's easy. So we think about what we learned about maturity, for example. Does the project have a well-defined life cycle? Do they have goals and roadmaps? Is there an ecosystem around them? What about leadership and governance? Do they have a project leader? Is it defined how the community can amend governance processes? Do they have release managers or a release management process? Community architecture, do they have infrastructure? Do they have chat forums? Etc., etc., etc. You just go through these different things, and then you get a really rich view of the health of a project. It's more than just, commits, right? So, with that said, luckily we have written some about this. We have measuring open source health paper that you can download and review and read in the comfort of your home. With that said, I can't believe we made it! That's great. That's my GitHub page. You'll find the presentation on it in case there are some distribution things. I think maybe we have, no, I don't think we have time for questions. Yeah, okay, all right. Feel free to raise your hand.
Questions?
What would be your advice trying to contribute to a project that's dead?
Well, I mean, if it's dead, you'll have to fork it, right? That's what we do typically.
That's what we do now, but we try to submit PRs and hope that they accept it, but it doesn't look like they do.
If it's dead and no one is behind you're ringing the door and no one is opening ever, I mean, it's a good sign that it's not a very healthy project and you should reconsider your dependency on this project probably. Maybe look in the ecosystem around that project a bit broader. You have something that almost does what you need, and a project that's healthy where you could perhaps contribute a patch to kind of get them over the line where it becomes a useful replacement for you. Yeah?
The dependency of the product is actually interesting. It's LibAbigail, which is developed by Red Hat.
Yeah, that's good. I'm not familiar to that specific project, but if it's no one answering, then it's, I guess, abandoned because of some reasons. And typically, when we move away from a project, it's because there is a better way to solve the basic problem. So I would, but without knowing anything about that, I would say, again, look a bit broader around it. Ask yourself the question, are people then using other projects to solve the same problem? Yeah.
I had one more question over here. No? Okay.
I just want you to tell us how the app saved your life. You said it in the beginning.
Yes, only over a beer or two.
Awesome, thank you, Magnus.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.